I was in social studies class, and I sat next to a young boy who was very quiet. He was very different. He did dress very differently. He dressed in all black, and he had occultic jewelry. And he started to bring in books, spell books, books on third eye. I started to connect with these books. It's like the books wanted me to read it. But this weed felt very different. Everything started moving in slow motion. I started seeing my friends like in triples. My heart rate was really, really going fast, like boom, 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 and I can hear it. And then I could hear my heartbeat go boom, 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 and I collapsed. It's like God was extending his love, his mercy, his grace over me and said, "Daughter, I hear you. I've been trying to get your attention, but you haven't listened to me. Now are you ready? I am real." And I said, "God, yes, I'm ready. I'm ready. Help me." Growing up, I can remember from a very young age that we grew up in a Christian household. Both my parents are Christian. They migrated from Bogota, Colombia here to Washington, D.C. They had me and my sister. So it's just my sister and I, and we grew up in the state of Maryland. And my whole life, I could just remember just Jesus. My whole childhood was just Jesus. My parents would take us to church every Sunday. And I remember my mom would dress us in these beautiful church dresses, my sister and I in these matching church dresses with the hats and the cute little shoes. And I remember just loving to go to the children's ministry to learn about Jesus. And we had arts and crafts, and they would have reading time, and they would sing to us the Christian hymns then. And that was my favorite part. And I believe that that's where music evolved in my life that way, as my father also was a musician and a singer at church. And music was very big in my household, and Jesus was everything in our household. That's all I can remember, is just being around church family, church friends, them coming over our house, we going over their house, going to retreats. Jesus was everything, our main focus in our household. As I grew older, I ended up going to middle school. And I believe that this is where the enemy had set up traps for me. Unknowingly, I was in social studies class, and I sat next to a young boy who was very quiet. He was very different. He did dress very differently. He dressed in all black, and he had occultic jewelry, but again, I didn't know what that was. And at that moment, I could tell that he was alone and to himself, and many people started bullying him in the classroom, and it was bothering me. I remember I would defend him. And I would say, "Leave him alone, just leave him alone." And he looked at that, and he drew close to me because of that, because, he wasn't sticking up for himself. I had empathy for him, and I was like, I'm going to say something, leave him alone. And so I did. And then he drew closer to me, and he started to open up. We became good friends. He started telling me about his family. He started telling me about his hobbies. And the more he felt comfortable with me, the darker the conversations became. Then suddenly he confessed to me that he was a practicing warlock. I didn't know what that was, All I knew was Jesus. And so I asked him, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, I practice witchcraft." Now, I had heard of witchcraft, but then I became more interested. So what does that mean? So what do you do? And so he started answering my questions. And I noticed that I started to become curious. And because of this, he knew I was becoming curious, and he started to bring in books, pretty dark books, spell books, books on third eye, books about necromancy, speaking to the dead, horoscopes. I'll never forget, he said, "This is the Bible," and it was a Satanic Bible he brought in from Anton LaVey. I'll never forget. And it looked dark. I couldn't believe it. This is all brand new to my ears. I'd never seen this before. This was a trap of the enemy, to confuse me, to divert me from God because of the curiosity and the questions that I had. I was, to begin with, very curious. I wanted to know more. And so he said, "Here, keep the books." So I'll never forget. I put them in my backpack. I went home and I started reading them. deep down inside, I knew it was bad because I was hiding them. I was hiding them from my parents. I started to get a little upset at my parents because I felt that my parents kept me in this bubble. They didn't want us to know about anything else but about Jesus. And so, I was angry. Like, why didn't they ever tell me about witchcraft? Why didn't they ever tell me about, sorcery and all this stuff, Why am I just finding out about this stuff in school? It made me feel like stupid, kind of dumb. He even laughed at me. My friend in social studies, like, what do you mean you don't know what that is? I didn't. And so I started reading the books at home, and I noticed a fear began. I started to feel fear, and I would close up the books. But the more fear, I don't know, for some reason, I started to connect with these books. It's like the books wanted me to read it. And then the more I read them, the darker they became, and the more interested I became. I became almost like obsessed with knowing what this occult, knowing about spells, knowing about horoscopes, knowing about astral projection, all this stuff. And so, this was a huge, huge trap from the enemy. Shortly after that, there was this movie that came out that summer. I'll never forget. It was called The Craft. And it was about 4 teenage girls. They were like in Catholic school, and they were dabbling in witchcraft. And so this was like the hot movie then. And so after that, by watching that, I didn't know that our eyes are a gateway, and because I watched that movie, that got me more into horror movies. It got me more into wanting to read more and dive in. Oh, it looks so cool. They project it to look so cool. And I watched it, and it drew me more curious, more obsessed. And so then I started asking my friend more questions, and he always had the answers. After this, I believe that by opening this door, I opened doors of fear by reading these books, doors of like an addiction, a curiosity. And shortly after this, we're in lunchroom, and my friend brings in this like cardboard, and it's a Ouija board, but he made it. And so then he starts showing it to me. And all the kids come around, and he's showing us how to use it. And I'm like, this is crazy, This guy, he's making this up, And he had a pencil and the pencil would move. And I was like, this is weird, And again, I became more curious. Like, what is this? Then he starts telling me, well, this is not the real thing. I made it. But the real board is at Toys R Us. And, then Toys R Us was super popular.
Wow.
And we had all the board games, growing up. I had Twister, Hungry Hippo, Operation, all sorts of like the toys that come with the board games. And we had them all, my sister and I. And so I told my parents, I was like, Mom, Dad, I want to get another board game. Oh, okay. So they took me, they didn't know. They're just thinking we're adding another board game to the collection. And I'm thinking the same thing, I didn't see maybe anything bad with the board. So I remember getting to Toys R Us. I bought the board. We brought it back home.
And really quick, Andrea,
Sure.
when you were buying this board, your parents may not have known what they were taking you for, but did they get an opportunity to see it? Did they know what it was, considering that they were all Christians and you guys grew in a Christian environment?
No, unfortunately, they did not know, Again, we had so many board games, the latest board games, the latest games. They always got us the best games, and they said, oh, this is just another game to their collection.